At this point, the Marvel Cinematic Universe has proven itself to be an unstoppable success machine. Every time someone thinks the world is getting superhero fatigue, the MCU proves them dead wrong to the tune of millions of dollars. Cha-ching! That being said, no one's perfect. Even the MCU has made huge mistakes it wants you to forget. Without question, there was one moment in the MCU that hurt fans more than any other. That, of course, is the tragic sacrifice Tony Stark made to save the universe from Thanos and his armies. While you might be thinking, it wasn't a mistake for Tony to sacrifice himself right now, I assure you that I agree. Tony Stark making the ultimate sacrifice of his family, his future, and his life to save every single person in existence was the perfect way to end the arc that started with him as a slimy weapons dealer. Only it's too bad that no one realized they could have brought him back seconds later with absolutely no consequences. Do you guys remember the scene with Thanos and Vision in Infinity War? That tragic moment where Wanda destroyed the Mind Stone and thus Vision as well? This was then followed up by Thanos doing what? Oh yeah, using the Mind Stone to reverse Vision's death without affecting the timeline around him. This exact same technique could have been used to bring Tony back to life without undoing the snap at all. A simple wave of Doctor Strange's hand would have allowed Tony to raise his daughter. Out of the 14 million futures you saw, you never figured out you could do that? Huh, Doctor? Huh? Sometimes the MCU will bring up a huge plot point in one movie, only to forget it in the next. This is especially true of Infinity Stones, whose powers and rules seem to change from movie to movie. In most of their appearances, it's clear that mere mortals were not meant to hold them. Heck, the entire climax of Guardians of the Galaxy centers around the idea that they can only hold the Power Stone as a team. So why was everyone else able to throw the Iron Gauntlet around like a freaking football during Endgame? When we see Hulk, Tony, and Thanos interact with the Gauntlet, it sends wave of energies through their bodies. This energy very nearly caused Professor Hulk so much pain that he was barely able to snap his fingers. That's why it was ridiculous that Clinton Barton was able to pick it up with no problem at all. Throughout the rest of the movie, several characters interact with the Gauntlet with little to no effect at all. Spider-Man, Black Panther, Captain Marvel don't even grimace as they hold the most powerful concentration of energy in their hands. Okay, well, for Captain Marvel that's probably a regular Tuesday, but for the rest, it should have really hurt. The Sony and Marvel shared custody over Spider-Man has been a contentious issue to say the least. Still, compared to how most studios deal with one another, it's pretty impressive. Think about it. You'll never see the day when the Justice League faces off against the Avengers, despite the fact that it would probably make half the world's money in the opening weekend. So all things considered, the Tom Holland Spider-Man movies have been a success. Well, aside from that terribly embarrassing mistake that occurred literally within the first 5 minutes of their first shared movie. You see, SpiderMan Homecoming takes place in the year 2016, the same year as Captain America Civil War. The very beginning of the movie takes place right after the Avengers in 2012. Now, can any of you tell me how many years there are between 2016 and 2012? If you answered 4, congratulations, you're better at math than apparently all of the execs at Sony and Marvel. That's because shortly after the opening scene, the scene cuts to black, and the title card reads 8 years later. Many fans have tried to explain how this insane time skip could have worked, but it makes absolutely no sense. Peter Parker was briefly retconned into Iron Man 2 at about age 10 in 2011, so unless he was held back in high school a lot, I'd say they just made a mistake. And that's why you need a guy in a chair. One of the best moments in Avengers Endgame came right at the end of the game when Cap revealed that he'd stay in the past to be with Peggy after he returned all the Infinity Stones. This is one of the sweetest moments in the franchise and a fitting way to end Cap's arc, as he finally got to have that dance with Peggy. Then the end credits roll and everyone's too misty-eyed to realize that nothing that just happened made sense. You see, Avengers Endgame set very clear rules for time travel. Rules that Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. didn't even pretend to care about in their final season, but that's a whole other thing. If you travel to the past and change anything, that doesn't change the future but rather creates an alternate one. Hulk and the Ancient One had a long talk about it while the Chitauri were busy blowing up half of Manhattan. So if Captain America were to go back in time and stay there, he would have stayed in an alternate timeline, not the one he came from. That's not even the most confusing part though. His entire mission was centered around him closing the time travel loop by returning the stones to the exact moment they were taken. Well, the time travel team that consisted of Cap, Tony, and Ant-Man was by far the worst team and made a huge mess of things. Loki stole the Tesseract, Tony had a heart attack, and Cap got beaten up by himself. How exactly was Prime Cap expected to make all that no longer happen? He also had to re-inject Jane Foster with the ether, return the Power Stone to the temple before Quill woke up, and return the stolen Tesseract to an old S.H.I.E.L.D. base the second they were taken. None of that sounds easy. Also, I'm pretty sure he refused to give the Soul Stone back to Red Skull, because Natasha would have been 100% alive if he did. The original Thor was the craziest MCU film once upon a time. To follow up the incredibly grounded Iron Man movies with the insane tale of a Norse god condemned to mortality was quite a bold move for Marvel. It worked so well that we're willing to forgive the fact that it showed Odin possessing an Infinity Gauntlet for no reason at all. That's alright though, because Thor Ragnarok fixed it. Hela showed that most of Odin's armory was full of fake artifacts as she pushed the gauntlet over. It was never the real gauntlet, mystery saw. Wait a minute. How could Odin have a replica of the Infinity Gauntlet if Thanos wouldn't have it made by the dwarves for years to come? Did Odin just see the future and refuse to tell anyone? That does 100% seem like the kind of move Odin would make. But why build a replica of it? Can't you find a better hobby? There is perhaps no piece of lore that the MCU likes to remind you of than the idea that Thor's hammer can only be lifted by someone who's worthy. The franchise goes to great lengths to show that none of the Avengers can hold it. Loki can't hold it, and even Stan Lee's pickup truck can't hold it. So how was Hela able to hold it in her hand in Ragnarok like no big deal? You mean to tell me that Steve Rogers can't hold Mjolnir, but the goddess of Hot Topic was able to palm it with no problem whatsoever? Not only that, but she's able to break the hammer with the same lack of effort. While Ragnarok tries to explain that the hammer doesn't actually hold Thor's power but channels it, Endgame completely contradicts that by having Steve throw around lightning bolts with it. Basically, Ragnarok decided to pretty much ignore Mjolnir's rules and make up new ones that promptly got forgotten. Here, Taika Waititi thought that he could just give us a fun movie with epic Led Zeppelin tracks, and we'd completely forget about what he'd done. Well, sir, I'm here to tell you that you were 100% correct. Steve Rogers and Peggy Carter have one of the all-time greatest love stories in the MCU. Sorry, Pepper, sorry, Jane, but Peggy wins this one by a mile. The two of them talk about finding the right dance partner early on in the first film, only for Steve to plummet in the ice right before they would have had their first dance. And then Steve travels back to the past after several years in the future to give her that dance at last. It's a beautiful story that's really only ruined by one thing: Peggy's niece. You know, cute little Sharon Carter who just wants to be like her Aunt Peggy. Well, turns out she was too much like Aunt Peggy because she ends up making out with her uncle. You see, before Endgame, Cap seemed like he was gonna live out the rest of his life in the future. So he decided to move on and find another girl to pine over. That girl would happen to be Sharon, who served as his primary love interest in the latter two Captain America films. I mean, what, did Peggy just literally never introduce her favorite niece to her husband? How could she have not figured out that they were both Steve Rogers? Sharon, aren't you a genius spy? For this entry, we could pretty much say The Incredible Hulk, because Marvel really wants you to forget about almost everything to do with that movie. They cut pretty much all the characters out of the MCU, recast the main character, and even utterly changed his personality. Seriously, the morbidly depressed Ruffalo Bruce Banner is nothing at all like the hopeful Ed Norton Banner, who wanted to learn to control the Hulk. Honestly though, none of that quite compares to what they did with one of the Hulk's greatest villains. Or rather, should I say didn't do. In The Incredible Hulk, we're introduced to Tim Blake Nelson's Samuel Stearns. Comic book fans that know this is actually a Hulk villain known as the Leader. Basically, where gamma rays made the Hulk super strong, they made the Leader super smart. And with a big old noggin to boot. The Incredible Hulk even had a sequence where Stearns had his brain all gamma rayed, only to completely forget they'd ever done this. Honestly, if it weren't for Thunderbolt Ross appearing in like 4 later MCU films, you'd be forgiven for thinking The Incredible Hulk wasn't even canon. Has anyone else been eagerly awaiting your own holographic computer ever since the first Iron Man came out? Seriously, Tony Stark has been using a ton of high-tech computers that look right out of Star Trek. Meanwhile, all the normal people in the world are still using regular computers. What's the deal, Tony? You transitioned away from weapon sales, but neglected to tell anyone you created the coolest computer ever made? What's even worse is that Tony frequently makes references to wanting to work on clean, renewable energy. He creates his own freakin element in Iron Man 2 just to power his suit safely. Where's that technology? Why aren't cars in the MCU running off arc reactors, Tony? This is just like your father teasing the world with a flying car all over again. Okay, so this is a safe space here. I'm gonna say something we all know, but no one really wants to say. Kevin Feige really hates all of the Netflix Marvel shows, don't you think? I mean, seriously, it would have been so easy to throw a passing reference to Alias Investigations, The Devil of Hell's Kitchen, or Luke Cage, Celebrity Superhero. The MCU seemed to go out of its way to ensure that there was absolutely no reference to any of these beloved properties that supposedly existed in the same universe. If that wasn't bad enough, it never even referenced the fact that Coulson survived his fatal stabbing in the Avengers and was made head of S.H.I.E.L.D. in his own show. To date, the only reference to the television properties has been Edwin Jarvis, appearing for like 6 seconds in Avengers Endgame. Luckily, the MCU seems to be redeeming itself with shows like WandaVision and Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Still, I want Matt Murdock to meet Peter Parker, and I'm never gonna forget that, Feige. I guess you can be forgiven for wanting us to forget the Inhumans, though. Yeah, let's all forget that happened. And there you have it. The biggest mistakes in the MCU. Were there any that we missed? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe to CBR.